Before the incident, my life was pretty much like anyone else's. I had just graduated high school, eager for the future but unsure of what it held. My days were filled with hanging out with friends, talking about dreams of adventure and success. None of us had concrete plans, but it didn't matter much then. My family was there, supportive but often a little distant. That uncertainty lingered, but nothing compared to what happened next. One moment, I was a young guy fresh out of school. Then, everything flipped upside down. I don't recall much about the crash itself, only that I woke up after 2 years in a coma. When I finally came to, my body was covered in scars, and I had no memory of who I was before. Worse still, my family was gone. The doctors tried explaining things, but I felt like I was waking up in someone else's life. Then, I heard Claire's voice cutting through the haze. "Dylan, wake up, you're dreaming again," she said softly. I had been dreaming of wasps, same as always. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, Claire still chuckled whenever I mentioned the killer wasp dream, a joke between us from some old comedy show. I got up and took a long shower, hoping to shake off the eerie feeling that clung to me. The dreams had been haunting me ever since the accident when I was 18. I didn't remember the accident itself, just the aftermath. After the coma, I decided to head off to college, still scarred and healing. My family was gone, but I wanted to push forward, somehow. The accident must have been serious. I could tell by the way my body had been patched up. I wondered if I'd been happy before all of this because I sure paid a steep price afterward. I became more cautious, seeking out a quiet, simple life. Strangely enough, I found myself drawn to accounting, something that never crossed my mind in high school. The doctors assured me that forgetting certain details was normal after such trauma. All I wanted now was a peaceful routine, a family, a home with a nice yard, and just stillness. But those dreams of wasps, they always came back, unsettling me. "Could you pass me some water?" I asked in my sleep. The wasps in the dream buzzed relentlessly, and each sting hurt more than the last. "Dylan, wake up," Claire's voice interrupted. "It's just a dream." The nightmares were getting worse. I admitted as much to her, though the doctor said it was probably just a strange fear of wasps. Claire and I got married when I was 21, and she was 26. It was a small ceremony in a tiny church near my college. Neither of us had much family left. After that, we settled down near her friends, and I kept my head down, finishing school. By 1980, I had my degree in accounting and computer science. Things moved fast after that, but I didn't question it. My new career as an accountant suited me well, quiet, predictable, and free from too much noise. My job was simple, mostly inventory and audit work. If 2 of us counted together, we'd come up with an agreed number, even if it was off. But when counting alone, things were usually spot on. It was boring, sure, but I didn't mind. I liked being left alone to do my work at my own pace. "Those wasps again," I muttered in one of my dreams. They seemed endless. I swatted at them, but they kept coming, even drawing blood this time. "Somebody call an exterminator." I yelled, "These things are dangerous." Suddenly, I heard a noise in the dream. It was a huge bird. No, bigger, like a pterodactyl. I flinched, feeling another sting. "Dylan, wake up," Claire's voice called me back. "You're having another bad dream." I did what she asked, took a shower, but the scars ached, and my head throbbed. "I hate those wasps," I said, "and now I'm dreaming of prehistoric birds. What's going on?" The dreams were getting weirder by the day. 2 years after our son, David, was born, we had our little girl, Emma. She was my princess, though I loved both of my kids deeply. But Emma had me wrapped around her little finger, just like her mother. Watching them grow, first steps, learning to ride bikes, playing catch, those moments were my happiest. Our neighborhood was tight-knit, and we had regular barbecues. Everyone knew each other well, except me. I was the odd one out, the newcomer. Maybe it was because Claire and I got married quickly after she found out she was pregnant with David. Our marriage was solid, though intimacy faded over time. But I was content with the life we'd built, my kids keeping me grounded. I overheard some of the women talking once. "Claire, how do you deal with boring Dylan?" Claire laughed. "He's perfect. Doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, and he's always there for me and the kids. He's a great provider. Claire announced she was pregnant with our third, Lucas, and we celebrated with friends. Our kids grew up alongside the neighborhood kids. People teased me for being boring, but I didn't mind. I liked running in the mornings, though no one ever joined me. Work was simple but kept me in shape, counting inventories in those warehouses. At home, I used weights in the basement, kept up with the kids' sports and music lessons. Claire stayed busy as a full-time mom, managing the chaos of family life. Wasps again, I muttered. And now these weird dragonflies are everywhere. In my dream, I could see people getting stung and panicking. Somebody get the antidote, but don't come near me, I shouted. Then, I saw the dragonflies swooping in, eating the wasps. At least they helped. Dylan, honey, take a shower, Claire said, snapping me back to reality. I did as she asked, but my head hurt and the scars ached. Why can't I remember the accident? I asked the doctor once. And why are my dreams so strange? He suggested the memory loss was from trauma, and as for the dreams, they might be related. Doctor, I'm not an expert on prehistoric birds, I joked. I'm just an accountant. The dreams only got worse. Life remained steady, though, just the way I liked it, calm and uneventful. I worked, counted things, and came home. Intimacy with Claire became less frequent, but it didn't bother me too much. The doctor didn't have any answers. Claire said nothing had changed about me, except the dreams. That was the last time I visited the doctor. Life went on, with the usual weekend barbecues and neighborhood gatherings. Our group stayed close, about 20 families, kids, and all. We handled PTA meetings, saved for college, and managed our kids' weddings. I took on extra shifts whenever we needed the money, proud of the fact that I could provide for my family. We had the house fully paid off, decent retirement savings, and even managed to afford new cars and family vacations. Claire's friends would sometimes poke fun at her, asking, "How do you manage being married to such a boring guy?" She'd laugh and say, "Oh, I keep myself entertained. Dylan takes good care of us, loves me, and loves the kids. I'm happy, and you should be too." As the years passed, we got closer to our 30th anniversary. Help the others, they've been stung. I mumbled in another strange dream, waving an imaginary fly swatter at the relentless wasps. It was just another wild night, but by now, I was used to it. "Hey Dylan, still dancing with men while getting stung by wasps?" My buddy Jake teased, making everyone laugh. I was shocked that Claire had shared something so personal with him, especially the part about my dreams. I thought that was something just between us. On the drive home that night, I pulled the car over to the side of the road. "Claire, why would you tell people about something so private?" "I trusted you," I said, feeling betrayed. Claire just laughed, dismissing it. "Dylan, come on, they're our closest friends. We spend all our time with them, we travel with them, and eat with them. Why are you so upset? You're the one dreaming about dancing with other men," she said lightly. But something snapped inside me then. For the first time, I realized that her friends, and even our relationship, meant more to her than I did. I started paying closer attention after that. A few months later, I decided to show up unannounced at one of their get-togethers. In 30 years, I had never done that. They'd often drop by our place without warning, but I'd always stayed polite. When I walked in that day, I found Claire, our grown children, and all 20 of our so-called friends, unclothed, involved in something I could barely comprehend. "Well, look who finally showed up, Paul, one of the guys," said as everyone laughed. "Come on in, Dylan. You've been in the dark long enough. Time to face the truth about your boring life." Claire, without a hint of shame, introduced me to the men she had been with for years, pointing out how their middle names matched our children's first names. It was the final confirmation of what I had already suspected. Turns out, they had been part of some twisted group, our own kids included, and I was the last to know. I realized why my children had long since stopped calling me Dad. I stood there, my world crashing down. "Claire, why did you do this? Why steal 30 years of my life? What did I ever do to deserve this?" I asked, my voice shaking. Claire sighed, as if I were being unreasonable. "Dylan, you're just so boring. No passion, no backbone. We've all been in this group since childhood, staying together, sleeping with each other. You were the extra guy, the one we needed to keep things even. We kept you in the dark because that's where you were happiest. I couldn't take the chance of you being the father of my children. I needed better genes. Why didn't you ever want a real marriage? I asked, hurt flooding my voice. I wanted more love, more connection, but you always pushed me away. Claire laughed, but it was cold. If I'd given you what you wanted, you'd have figured out the truth. I couldn't let that happen. I picked you because I was already pregnant, and you were easy to manipulate. One night together, and I had you believing you were the father. You never stood a chance. Was that all I was to you? I asked, devastated. Just a wallet while you ran around with your old friends and brought our kids into this nightmare? Were the words you said, baby, honey, just lies? Don't be ridiculous, Dylan, she replied casually. I sort of liked you. Calling you those names was just me being nice. But after years of those bizarre dreams about dancing with men and worrying about prehistoric birds, wasps, and dragonflies, you started to disgust me. You're a freak. Now you know the truth, but it's too late. If you divorce me, I'll take half of everything in alimony for life, Claire said with a smirk. And all your lovers, they're in on this too? I demanded. They're not just friends, Dylan. They're my real partners. We've been in love with each other since we were kids. It's something you could never understand, Claire replied, her voice dripping with disdain. Her friends chimed in, laughing at me. You were the perfect fool, Dylan, one of them said. While you were off working, we were sleeping with your wife and, well, even your kids are in on it. We wouldn't touch you. You were only good for your money, to help us raise our kids. They all laughed, openly mocking me now that the truth was out. Be a good little housekeeper and clean up. We'll be back in a few days, Claire said as she joined in the laughter. As I walked out the door, I turned back to her. You threw away our entire life for this? You gave our kids to people who don't even respect you. And you're proud of that? I said, my voice shaking with rage. Did it ever occur to you that your friends' children aren't part of this? Think about that for a moment. I paused, feeling one last piece of anger swell up inside me. Oh, and by the way, remember when that guy eliminated himself rather than marry someone pregnant by John? Didn't that give you a clue? I asked, knowing the truth would haunt her now. What she didn't know was that I had a hidden camera that recorded everything. As I left the house, I had 6 county deputies waiting outside. I pointed toward the house and said, they're all in there. The screams from inside were deafening as the officers entered and caught 23 people, all completely exposed. I didn't stick around to see what happened next. I walked away slowly, smiling to myself. The restraining orders would keep them at a distance while everything settled down. The divorce process wasn't pretty, but I made sure to file it in another county to avoid the locals talking. I didn't just settle for a divorce either. I went for an annulment on the grounds of fraud. With all the evidence I had from our conversations, I sued Claire's friends for millions. They confessed to the whole scheme, using me to finance their lives while they carried on their affairs behind my back. With those confessions, I secured the house, all our savings, and the retirement accounts. Since it was clear fraud, the judge ruled there was no community property. Claire and her friends ended up owing me for all the years I'd spent raising kids that weren't mine. My kids, who hadn't called me dad in ages, hated me for what I'd done to their parents. But I didn't care. As an accountant, I knew exactly how to get what I was owed. In the end, I walked away with over $5 million, hitting them where it hurt. It didn't bankrupt them, but it put a serious dent in their finances. They even pooled their money together to pay me off, especially after I started filing liens on their properties. I also had the kids' birth certificates changed since they were based on lies. Claire was forced to drop my last name too, which was a small victory. I didn't care what names the kids used after that. I cut all contact with them, not wanting anything to do with the house or the memories tied to it. But I didn't want to sell the place either. I wanted to demolish it. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I returned to the neighborhood with a demolition crew. Claire and the kids lost their minds when they saw what was happening. The house was worth around $600,000, but I had jacked up the price to $1.1 million. All their so-called friends chipped in to buy it because their own properties were connected to the lot. Their entire social group's lifestyle depended on that house staying intact. I made an extra $500,000 within a few days just from negotiating. Before I left, I made sure to erase every trace of our life together. I destroyed photos, old cards, school projects, everything. I left the place in ruins. The utilities were shut off, the house filled with rotting food, and I painted every wall and ceiling black. Claire got the house in the end, but by then, it was nothing more than their party spot. She became the group's personal servant, though she saw herself as something more. She still believed her kids were special, thinking they were part of something bigger, but they were just gullible enough to buy into her lies. I quit my job, left everything behind, including my old clothes, and started fresh. I drove through the night, stopping at a cheap motel somewhere out of the way. The next day, I bought some new clothes at Walmart, rented a different car, and ditched anything that reminded me of those 30 wasted years. It felt like wiping the dust off my feet, a clean break. 2 days later, I found myself in Washington, D.C., at the Pentagon, or more precisely, in one of its annex buildings, filling out a job application. I gave them my new address and a fresh cell number, having gotten rid of the old one. During my investigation, I had discovered they'd been tracking my calls, so I used that to my advantage. The Department of Defense hired me within a week. The interview was a little strange, but they needed a CPA, and I had the credentials. When they asked if I wanted to claim veterans preference, I explained my coma and how I hadn't served in Vietnam. A Navy officer even took my fingerprints electronically, and with a smile, they said, "Welcome to the Department of Defense, Mr. Burke. Where would you like to be stationed?" Without thinking, I surprised myself by asking for an assignment in Iraq or Afghanistan. After everything, I was done with the dull routine of life. I craved some excitement. A few days later, they had me fitted for body armor, gear I had to pay for myself, and sent me off to weapons training. It felt odd for a civilian auditor, but they insisted. "We think it's necessary," they told me. I wasn't Rambo, but they equipped me with twin .45s, an M16A4, and an M9 bayonet. My first assignment was in Afghanistan. The sound of the helicopter blades chopping through the air hit me hard. It reminded me of the noise from my dreams. It wasn't exactly the same, but close enough. I must have heard it somewhere before, even if I couldn't remember the exact moment. The dreams still haunted me, but without a lying wife pretending to care, they didn't sting quite as much. I traveled between various bases, conducting audits, assessing supplies, and quickly learning how fragile alliances could be. Out here, friendships were for sale. The enemy of my enemy was my friend, at least, for the right price. The dreams didn't stop, but they changed. The faceless figures I used to see in the smoke now had faint features, young faces I didn't recognize. I was surrounded by soldiers, most of them barely 18, some already with kids of their own. To them, a man in his 30s was Dad, and anyone over 40 was Gramps. By the time you hit 50, you were just the old guy. I watched them, moving with precision like they were part of some deadly dance. Their discipline reminded me of ancient Roman soldiers, like Tiberius, who practiced drills as if they were bloodless battles, only to face bloody battles later. I admired their dedication, but I wondered what their lives would be like down the road after seeing and doing such violent things. The dreams persisted, wasps, dragonflies, snakes, but the intensity faded. The faces of the smoke people became clearer, but I still didn't know them. Meanwhile, I continued my work, counting everything from bullets and rockets to socks and bottled water. We had to plan everything with precision, making sure we had enough for the future while accounting for losses along the way. Planning was crucial. Every supply had to be tracked, shipped, and stocked properly. About 4 months in, we got hit. It was an ambush. The sound of bullets flying overhead was like the buzzing of bees. The chaos erupted all around us. I kept my cool, following the soldiers' lead as they moved with precision through the firefight. We watched for flanking maneuvers, calling in support when needed. The training we'd all been through took over, and we worked as a unit. The firefight ended quickly, and the enemy faded back into the rough terrain. After that day, the strange dreams I'd been having almost completely disappeared, replaced by the harsh reality of combat. Soon after, I was transferred to Iraq for the same job, managing supplies, tracking what was needed and cutting what wasn't. The scale of the operation there was even bigger, with more equipment and supplies to count and, naturally, more to lose. I started joining patrols under the guise of assessing field assets, but in truth, I just wanted to escape the endless grind of inventorying warehouses. Out there, moving through the dust and danger, it felt like we were dancing to the rhythm of war. I stayed distant from others, speaking little, always watching, always writing notes and filing reports. The Department of Defense loves paperwork, though now everything was uploaded digitally by satellite. Distractions were everywhere, even the occasional bees stinging me here and there, but I pushed through. After over 4 years on the job, I let my superiors know that I had gone from being part of a team to leading one, and eventually to working solo. War had become my escape, a distraction from the mess of my previous life. Despite the constant danger, firefights, and a few close calls, I made it through mostly unscathed. I kept on with my audits of supply depots, counting everything from ammo to uniforms, ensuring military operations could keep running smoothly. The Army, Marines, Navy, and Air Force each had their role to play in this high-stakes game. I didn't relish battle or the thought of taking lives, but the absence of dreams, the painful reminders of my old life, was a relief. I was well-prepared and well-equipped, and even high-ranking officers rarely bothered me. I just did my job, learned the terrain, and helped where needed. I didn't make any real friends, just temporary allies, fellow Americans I'd work with or maybe risk my life for. The mission was simple: break things, create chaos, and get home in one piece. Everything else was just background noise. Every time I entered a new depot, it was the same routine. A sergeant major would try to give me a hard time, and I'd have to assert myself. It was always a power struggle. When I met Sergeant Major Claw, it was no different. "This is my house, my rules," she growled, getting right up in my face. "Don't give me that," I shot back. "This is my jurisdiction, and I oversee everything here." She barked at me not to touch anything without her approval and stormed off. I couldn't help but notice her posture, sharp, alert, and I guess she was Native American by her features. I decided to avoid escalating things any further for the moment and joined a patrol instead, wanting to get out of the depot and back into the field. Sergeant Major Jen Claw was tough. Her full name was Jennifer Ironclaw, and she had earned the nickname Ironclaw from her grandfather, a full-blooded Northern Blackfoot warrior who had fought in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Raised by her grandparents after her parents died in a mysterious car accident, Claw had been shaped by the stories and lessons of her warrior lineage. At 18, she joined the army, serving in Kosovo and Montenegro, rising through the ranks with relentless determination. She even earned a master's degree in logistics and took immense pride in her heritage. There was no way she was going to let a civilian like me walk all over her. Still, I returned to the depot one evening and found her sleeping in her uniform, boots on, a .45 pistol at her side, always ready for action. I lied and said I was securing the depot, but in truth, I was drawn to her. Despite our tension-filled relationship, there was something about her that intrigued me. Claw, though, was always on guard. She was a force of nature, not someone to be taken lightly. That depot became my main base of operations. I spent most of my time there, inspecting inventory, cross-checking records, and making sure everything ran smoothly. My interactions with Claw remained tense, but despite the friction, there was a mutual respect. She was sharp and didn't tolerate slack. I knew if things ever escalated into a real confrontation, she'd likely come out on top. I admired her toughness, even if we butted heads regularly. Claw, on the other hand, was just as frustrated with me. To her, I was a civilian playing soldier, a potential liability. She made multiple attempts to get me off the patrols, but somehow, I earned respect from the SEAL teams and others around me. That only made her more determined to figure me out. Between the skirmishes, the endless buzzing of wasps, and the occasional strange dream, our rivalry grew fiercer by the day. Claw, in one of our rare conversations, opened up about her life. "I was raised by my grandparents after my parents' deaths, and the Army's been my whole world ever since," she said. "I always wanted to find a partner like my grandfather, a warrior, but now that I'm 45, I've accepted that it won't happen. I won't have children. Her voice softened as she admitted this. Her grandfather, scarred from his battles across 3 wars, had always told her she'd have a family of her own someday. But as time passed, that seemed more and more impossible to her. Lately, though, she added, my dreams have been filled with you. At first, I didn't understand it, but I see you differently now. You're not just some guy in a car accident. You've got the kind of scars only a warrior earns. One night, she admitted that she had watched me shower, watched me scrubbing my hands as though I were trying to wash away something invisible. She saw the weight I carried and realized I wasn't just some lost soul. There was no romantic love between us, but something deeper formed, an understanding that ran through the unspoken bond of shared hardship. I see you, she said one night. You're my warrior. Meanwhile, I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else. I told her everything about my past, the dead marriage, Claire's betrayal, and the 3 kids who weren't mine. I hadn't felt much in years, but something about being around Claw was different. She smiled at me that night, a glint of playfulness in her eyes, and said, "Then you're ready." There was something warm and knowing in her words. I never imagined finding love again after everything with Claire, but there I was with Claw, who called me her silver-haired warrior. One night, she invited me to bed, her scars and years of battle showing. But to me, she was perfect. We kissed deeply, her passion undeniable, and I hoped she could see the same love in my eyes. "I love you," I whispered to her. "And if you ever stop," she teased with a grin, "I'll scalp you for real." This was the connection I'd craved all my life. For once, I felt whole. Later, Claw asked me if she could tell her grandfather about my dreams. She explained that he had a deep understanding of dreams, better than anyone she knew. It was the first time anyone had asked my permission to share something so personal. I trusted her completely, so I agreed. "If your grandfather can help with the dreams, I'm all for it," I told her. "They've mostly gone away, but I still want to know what they mean." Claw spoke to her grandfather, and when she returned, she relayed his message. "He said your spirit is unsettled, but that I'm helping you. You're the warrior I've been searching for, and you found me without even knowing it. Everything will unfold as it's meant to. There's no need to worry." I smiled. "Sometimes your mystic stuff drives me crazy, but somehow you're always right." Claw laughed, and when she told her grandmother the good news, her grandmother had chimed in as well. "I heard it all, Jen. You'll make me a great-grandmother soon. And don't keep those kids too far from us." Our relationship deepened after that. Claw admired my scars, calling them beautiful. She didn't care about my past, only who I was now. We worked hard in the middle of a war zone, but we always found time for each other. 3 months into our relationship, we knew everything about one another. She loved my scars, tracing them with her fingers and kissing them like they were badges of honor. Sergeant Major Jennifer Claw was the love of my life. Then, one morning, everything changed. I was inside the depot when I heard the sharp crackle of gunfire. I rushed outside just in time to see a helicopter spiraling toward the ground, likely hit by insurgent fire. Chaos erupted as over 100 insurgents launched a full assault on our position. I spotted Claw sprinting toward the crash site, her .45 in hand, reloading as she fired, unflinching in the face of danger. I ran after her, emptying my magazine as fast as I could, taking out as many enemies as possible. We were caught off guard in a vulnerable moment, but all I could think about was getting to Jen. I saw her fall, hit by a bullet that knocked her to the ground. I reached her in seconds. She was alive, but the impact had been rough. Her vest had absorbed most of the shot, but she was in pain. I handed her one of my .45s and spare magazines. "Don't hold back. Liquidate anything that comes over that ridge, even if you think it's me," I told her before charging back into the fight. Reinforcements were on their way, but an enemy soldier got too close. Fueled by sheer determination and anger, I fought on, even after I ran out of bullets. My only thought was keeping Claw safe. When I had no more ammo, I drew my M9 and went hand-to-hand with one of the insurgents. He was carrying a detonator, ready to blow something big. I grabbed his right hand, struggling to keep the device from going off. I was lucky, it didn't explode. We wrestled as the firefight continued around us. When I finally had him pinned, I realized there was only one outcome. I took control, ending his life swiftly. His eyes widened in shock, but there was a strange acceptance in them as he realized his end was near. I pulled him with the knife still embedded in his skull and threw his body into a nearby trench. A massive explosion rocked the area moments later, knocking me unconscious. Damn it! Where are all these bees coming from? I shouted, half-dazed, as I regained consciousness. My ears were ringing, and everything was chaos. I need more ammo. I barked, catching a bandolier someone tossed my way. Johnson, Roberts, get over here. Suppressing fire on the left, I ordered. Williams, hold your position and keep firing at anything near the tree line. Move fast, no hesitation. Bullets zipped through the air like angry bees, and I heard Johnson joking with Roberts despite the carnage around us. Quit laughing, Johnson, or you'll get yourself killed, I warned, my voice sharp. The sound of a Cobra gunship overhead filled the air. Cover your necks. That brass is gonna be hot. I yelled as the chopper opened fire. Slicks are inbound. Get ready to move. Wilson grabbed Johnson, screaming, Don't you die on me, Johnson. I'll drag you to hell and back if you do. Medic. I screamed. Get over here. Johnson needs help now. Amidst the chaos, I stayed focused. Hit the tree line with grenades. I shouted. Move toward the LZ. Drag anyone who's down with you. No one gets left behind. I grabbed an enemy AK as we moved, trying to blend in with the insurgents. Watch the smoke. Charlie can see it just as well as our Cobras, I warned, making sure we stayed low. As we neared the LZ, I turned to Ulrika, one of our medics. You're the last one out. I promise you that, I whispered to calm her. I've got you. The helicopter blades roared overhead like giant dragonflies. Stay low. I shouted again as the battle raged on. Just then, a voice called out, How'd you guys end up pinned down here? I murmured to myself, Stay with me. Don't fade. My heart pounded as I glanced at the wounded. The chief is down but not out, I muttered, barely holding it together. I crouched beside one of our men, my voice shaking as I whispered, Come on, stay with me. We're not done yet. I wasn't sure who had spoken. My head was spinning as I blinked, waking up in a brightly lit room, disoriented. As my vision cleared, I saw Jen sitting nearby. Hey, Jen, I managed to say, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. I remember everything now. Snakes, hogs, bees. Did I really live through all of that before? She smiled warmly. Maybe you did, Dylan. Maybe you did. You're my brave warrior. I noticed something I hadn't before. A ring on her finger. Are you married? How long have I been out? Just over a year, she said softly, nodding. And yes, I'm married to you. An officer walked into the room, clipboard in hand. How are you feeling today? He asked. Better, I think, I replied, still trying to piece everything together. Have we gone through this before? The officer gave a knowing smile. Yes. You've been in and out for almost a year, but you're doing much better now. That's when I heard the sound of babies crying. Jen stood up and crossed the room, returning with 2 tiny infants cradled in her arms. How old are they? I asked, awestruck. 3 months, she answered with a gentle smile. This is Dylan Jr., and this is Lily. They're ours. I didn't think I could have kids anymore, but here we are, and I'm married to you forever. She placed the babies in my arms, and a rush of pure love filled me. For once, I had no questions. I didn't need to ask for explanations or clarifications. All that mattered was holding my family close. Jen added, I even did DNA tests for you, to be sure. But I don't need them, I interrupted. I already know. I glanced down at my hand and saw a simple gold band. How did we get married? I wondered, but I didn't ask. It didn't matter anymore. 6 months later, we found ourselves at Claire's house. The original group of 23 people, including her children, were gathered there. As they watched TV, the screen suddenly switched to a news segment. The announcer spoke clearly, stating that Command Sergeant Major Dylan Burke was to receive the Medal of Honor. The entire room fell silent. John Sr. grumbled, visibly irritated. That can't be our Dylan Burke. Then, a photo appeared on the screen. A picture of me in uniform, smiling, medals on my chest. Jen stood beside me in the image, holding our children. The announcer introduced retired General Hannigan and Admiral Wilson, explaining that they had served alongside me in Vietnam. Vietnam? Claire gasped, eyes wide in disbelief. Dylan was in Vietnam? The announcer asked the officers to share stories about their time with me. General Hannigan began. I had the honor of serving with then Sergeant Burke during my time as a second lieutenant in Vietnam. Burke was already on his second tour, acting as a platoon sergeant. He wasn't officially promoted to staff sergeant until later, but he took command when he had to. Hannigan continued, we were part of a long-range reconnaissance patrol, 18 men in my platoon. When we got ambushed deep in the jungle, the enemy had probably been tipped off about our position. The firefight lasted for over an hour, and I was shot early on. Burke stepped in, taking command without hesitation. He even ordered one of the men to use the grenade launcher, but the situation only got worse. The enemy just kept coming at us like an angry swarm of hornets. Hannigan's voice was steady as he recounted the chaos. We were running low on ammo, and Burke went hand-to-hand with several of the enemy, taking out 3 of them with his knife. His focus was on getting us out alive. He was lethal with that blade. Even though he was wounded himself, Burke kept going, cracking jokes to keep morale up. That's how he was, always breaking the tension, even when things were dire. The general's face grew somber as he recalled the final moments of that battle. Eventually, we got air support, A-37 jets, the Dragonflies, and Cobra helicopters, each one laying down fire to give us a chance to evacuate. But the enemy was too close for the Cobras to engage. Burke helped everyone into the choppers, one by one, grabbing enemy AKs along the way to keep us covered. I was the last man left, barely conscious from blood loss. Burke, who couldn't have weighed more than 130 pounds, hoisted me onto his back and carried me to the Huey. Just before tossing me onto the chopper, he joked, now you can say you were the last man off the field. That was Dylan, always putting others before himself. The room stayed silent as the general continued. I recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but he was awarded the Silver Star instead. Burke saved all our lives that day. When I tried to thank him afterward, he was already back in the field. His wounds weren't severe enough to send him home, not that he would have wanted to leave. There was always this look in his eyes, focused, distant. He was ready for battle. And now, 30 years later, I see that look is gone when he's with his wife and kids. It's good to see him finally happy. Claire and her group sat in stunned silence as the TV continued playing. The announcer turned to Admiral Wilson. Admiral, you also served with Sergeant Major Burke. Can you tell us more about your experiences with him? Admiral Wilson nodded. My encounters with Burke were similar to the general's. I was leading a SEAL team at the time, operating in an area we weren't officially supposed to be in after 1971, but we were still there, serving as advisors. Our patrols overlapped with Burke's unit. We used to joke with him about being an Army guy, and he'd give us plenty of ribbing right back. But when the fighting started, Burke was always there. The Admiral's tone grew serious as he spoke. During one of our operations, we got ambushed and flanked. Burke showed up out of nowhere, acting like he had an entire battalion backing him up. The way he moved, fast, aggressive, it spooked the enemy. They thought they were up against far more men than we actually had. In the chaos, bullets were flying everywhere. And the whole time, Burke was talking about bees swarming, as if the enemy were nothing more than insects. He had this way of cracking jokes during combat, Admiral Wilson continued, his voice filled with admiration. Even when things were dead serious, he'd throw in some humor to keep everyone sharp, to make sure we stayed focused. It wasn't that he wasn't serious, he was deadly serious. But the jokes helped us survive the worst moments and keep our heads clear. Wilson paused for a moment, reflecting. When the choppers finally arrived to get us out, Dylan made it clear the medics were to prioritize others before himself. He wouldn't take treatment until everyone else was cared for. We were lucky that the 1st Cavalry came in fully armed to help us out. Dylan was shot up pretty bad, but he still dragged me to the chopper, positioning his body between me and the enemy, just like he'd done for General Hannigan. He He made sure I was the last one off the field. That's something important to an officer, and Dylan knew it. The Admiral's voice softened as he remembered. After we got out, he told me he was exhausted. He said he just wanted to go home, fall in love, and live a boring life. He didn't want to think about the Army or Vietnam ever again. Admiral Wilson took a breath before continuing. A few months later, we crossed paths at the Pentagon. I had recommended him for the Medal of Honor, but he received the Navy Cross instead. He didn't seem particularly happy, though. Even when he smiled for the official photo, I could tell something was missing. He quietly left the military soon after that, and before he did, I gave him my Navy SEAL badge. He didn't say much, just nodded and disappeared. Wilson shook his head as he recalled their final encounter. Later, I saw him again at a bus stop outside the Pentagon, dressed in civilian clothes. I offered him a ride, but he acted like we were strangers. I asked him where he was headed, and all he said was that he was going out west to college. He gave me no details. At the Greyhound station, I handed him a box full of his awards and medals, his Navy Cross, his Silver Stars, his Purple Hearts. He barely looked at it, claimed he'd never been in the military, and said he'd been in a coma after an accident. Then he shrugged and walked away. The Admiral sighed. Dylan told me he wanted to forget everything, and I guess this was his way of doing it. That was the last time I saw him, until now. In the living room, Claire's children sat frozen, struggling to comprehend what they were hearing. John Jr. spoke up, his voice low. I saw that box once years ago. Dad said it wasn't important and took me outside to play catch. When I went looking for it later, it was gone. Without realizing it, John Jr. had referred to me as Dad instead of Roger. He stood up and went downstairs. Moments later, he returned, holding the very box Admiral Wilson had described. As he came back into the room, the TV screen flashed with the president presenting me with a second Medal of Honor. No one since Pappy Boyington had ever received the award twice. The announcer's voice continued, telling Boyington's story. The first time he was awarded the Medal of Honor, it was posthumously, along with a Navy Cross, because everyone thought he had died in action. When Boyington was later found alive, having spent 20 months in a Japanese prison camp, President Truman presented him with the Medal of Honor again in person. As the president recounted his own experience, the room remained silent. He described a helicopter mission where a lucky shot had disabled the engine, causing the helicopter to go down. The president and his advisors, along with a Secret Service detail, ran for cover, as the helicopter quickly became the target of an attack. The attackers didn't know it was the president's helicopter, but the presence of the Secret Service tipped them off that someone important was on board. "We were under fire," the president said, his voice steady, "when I saw Command Sergeant Major Dylan Burke charging the enemy by himself. At first, it looked like he was alone. Then, I saw a wounded soldier nearby, and Dylan paused. He handed something to the soldier, then sprinted forward, straight toward the enemy, his shots hitting their targets with deadly precision." The president continued, "Dylan's actions gave our men time to regroup and fight back. When he ran out of ammo, he didn't hesitate. He charged one of the attackers with nothing but a knife. Even from a distance, we could tell the man was a walking bomb, based on the way his clothes moved and what was strapped to his chest. Without thinking of his own safety, Dylan grabbed the detonator from the man's hand and neutralized him with the blade." The president's voice filled with admiration as he spoke. Dylan didn't stop there. He carried the body to a trench before the explosion went off, limiting the damage. Even as the attackers tried to shoot him, hoping he'd drop the bomb and trigger it, Dylan kept going. He was hit multiple times, but refused to stop until everyone was safe. The president paused, then continued, "But that wasn't the only extraordinary thing Dylan did that day. When we reached him, after the fight, he made a request. The soldier he had helped was Sergeant Major Jennifer Claw. Back then, she was Corporal Claw. Dylan asked me to marry them right there, on the battlefield. He told me, fair is fair. He wanted her to receive survivor benefits if he didn't make it. I reinstated him into the Army on the spot and performed the fastest wedding ceremony in history. I asked twice, and after 2 yes, they were married." A murmur ran through the crowd as the president smiled at me on the screen. "Now, from what I can see," he added, "Sergeant Major Jennifer Burke is wearing a maternity uniform. Looks like we'll soon have 2 more little Burkes running around, which makes 4 in total. The president finished with a note of pride. Men like Command Sergeant Major Burke answer the call when their country needs them. Then, they return to their families without talking about their heroism. They are the backbone of America, and we are honored to have him. This time, we're not letting him go. He is staying in the Army, where he belongs. He is home. The camera panned to the audience, where Jin's grandparents sat, watching with pride. The announcer added, "Among the crowd today are his wife's grandparents, one of whom many of you know as Master Sergeant Strong Bear." The announcer called out, "Master Sergeant Strong Bear, himself a Medal of Honor recipient. Would you please stand so we can honor you?" The man I'd come to think of as my father-in-law stood, receiving a warm round of applause from the crowd. It had been just a month since I rejoined the world. After everything that had happened, Jen and I traveled with our children to her family's reservation in Montana while I was on medical leave. During that visit, we participated in a traditional Blackfoot marriage ceremony, officially binding our family to the tribe. Just 4 months after giving birth, Jen became pregnant again. Our children were welcomed into the Blackfoot Nation with open arms. Jen was proud. Proud to be a Blackfoot bride, a Blackfoot mother, and the wife of a warrior. To her, every scar I bore was a badge of honor, a symbol of my courage. She often said that I was her great stallion, and in her eyes, those scars only made me more hers. One evening, while we were alone, she voiced a concern. "Dylan, my love," she said, "I'm a little worried about being pregnant again. I can't seem to stop making love to you, but I'm afraid if we keep this up, I'll just keep getting pregnant. Maybe I should get fixed so it doesn't happen again." I chuckled at her suggestion. "Jen, would you want to be married to a gelding instead of a stallion?" "No way. We won't stop, and I'll have as many children with you as the spirit allows. You have a warrior for a husband, and I want the world to see that." That was the end of that conversation. Though we didn't have more children after the second set of twins, a boy and a girl. Those two were also welcomed into the Blackfoot Nation. They were born on the reservation, and I was there for their birth, cutting their cords and being the first to hold them, aside from their mother. For the next 10 years, I was a devoted father and husband, traveling the world with my family as part of various military missions. Because of my service and dedication, Jen and I were always stationed together, even though our roles were different. We both retired from the military on the same day. No matter how hard I tried to return to a combat zone, the Department of Defense wouldn't allow it. They considered me a national treasure, too valuable to risk. Our children grew up on military bases around the globe, living the life of a military family. When they were old enough, 2 of them were accepted into West Point, and the other 2 went to Annapolis, all through presidential appointments. At the ceremony, the president was speaking. "Command Sergeant Major Burke, I'd like to remind everyone that while a sergeant major is a leader, not a commander, you'd better follow your wife's orders. After all, she outranks you." The audience erupted in laughter and applause as the formal event came to a close. The President and First Lady made their way through the crowd, greeting attendees, while the mood remained light and celebratory. But somewhere else, something more serious was unfolding. John Jr. had opened the old box and found my dog tags, medals, ribbons, and several citations. He spread them out on the table, inspecting each item. Among them were my Navy Cross and Silver Star, but there was more. He discovered multiple Bronze Stars, all with the V device for valor in combat. There were commendation medals from the Army, Navy, and Air Force, all with the same valor markings. It wasn't unheard of for a soldier to receive medals from different branches for service in joint operations, but it was rare. John Jr. also found several Purple Hearts, 6 in total. Normally, receiving 3 meant mandatory removal from combat, but somehow I had managed 6, earned across different operations with the Navy and Air Force. Some of those injuries hadn't even been officially recorded. It explained the extent of my scars, some from bullets, some from explosions, and others from close-quarters combat. For reasons of my own, I had always told people those scars came from a car accident rather than reliving the horrors of war. Maybe I didn't remember everything, or maybe I just preferred the lie. There was also a Good Conduct Medal, a Combat Infantryman's Badge, and even a Gold Navy SEAL Trident Badge, featuring an eagle, an anchor, and a pistol. There were no official records with it, but it was clear the admiral had given it to me on my last day in the service. Additionally, John found several medals from the Republic of Vietnam, along with the original paperwork that had recommended me for various awards. The general and admiral had known some of my story, but the paperwork revealed a lot more. Testimonies from other soldiers in my unit described things I had never talked about. The real depth of my service, far beyond what the generals had witnessed. As everyone at the table read through the documents and inspected the medals, John Jr. glanced at Claire and the overweight man who had always been around her. "This is the man you thought had better genes than Dylan?" he asked, his voice dripping with disdain. The last item in the box was a sealed envelope addressed to my children. John Jr. carefully opened it and began to read aloud. It was a letter I had written decades ago, at 20 years old, before leaving the Army. The letter read, "My dear children, I hope by the time you're reading this, I've had the chance to raise you. I'm writing this on the eve of leaving the Army. I've done things a civilized man shouldn't do, and even though it was war, it doesn't make it right. Just because I was ordered to do them doesn't absolve me of the guilt I carry. These were things I had to do, but they still weigh on me," the letter continued. "Being young doesn't make it right, but from now on, I'll do my best to live better. It's never too late to try. I want to leave the past behind and move forward while atoning for my actions along the way. But before I do, I want to leave you with some words I hope will guide you, just as I try to live by them myself." The letter's tone became more personal. A person's true value isn't in a box full of medals or in what's written on a piece of paper. It's not in the things we wear to show off what we've done. Your worth is found in how you live every single day. It's how you treat your friends, how you treat strangers, and most importantly, how you love and care for your family. You put them first, no matter the cost. The best part is, they love you for who you are, not for what you've accomplished or how much you earn. So every day, do your best for them, and they will return that love in kind. The letter concluded with a heartfelt plea. That's the real measure of a person. I hope I've lived up to that for you. May God bless you and keep you safe. May He forgive me for what I've done in war, and I hope He never needs to forgive you. I pray you will live a just, good, and moral life, as a loving parent and a faithful spouse. With love, your father, Dylan. By the time the letter was finished, John Jr. and his half-sisters were in tears. John finally spoke, his voice breaking. "I'm done here. Who's coming with me?" Gently gathering the papers and documents, he placed them back into the box, making sure everything was exactly as it had been. His sisters stood up silently, following him out of the room. His wife stayed behind, her eyes distant. 3 days later, a package arrived at the Pentagon, addressed to Command Sergeant Major Dylan Burke. Inside the outer wrapping was a simple brown box tied with twine. It was delivered directly to Dylan, unopened. Beneath the twine, but outside the box, was a short, typed note. It read, "This isn't meant for us. We wish it were, but it's not." The note wasn't signed, but Dylan knew exactly who had sent it. For months later, John, along with Paula and Billy, had all changed their last names. "We can be better," John said quietly to his sisters. "This time, we can be the kind of people Dad wanted us to be." They nodded in agreement, walking away together, united in their resolve. Meanwhile, I reflected on those last few months. After the original awards were returned to me, I shared the letter I had written years ago with Strong Bear. We were sitting around a campfire on a warm summer evening, surrounded by at least 50 people from the tribe. It was a communal gathering, a celebration of family and life. Jen, as beautiful as ever, was there with our children. She was pregnant again, and her pride in me was evident. Her grandmother's pride in Strong Bear was equally clear. I handed the letter to Strong Bear, the one I had written as a young man, addressed to my future children. He read it, smiled, and passed it around the circle. I was a bit surprised that such a personal letter was being shared without my permission, but I was even more stunned when Strong Bear tossed the letter into the fire. "Words on paper don't mean anything," he said firmly. "You wrote that letter, but it's your actions that will show your children who you are. It's how you live your life that matters. You already know that." He was right, of course. He always was. And over the next 30 years, Jen and I lived by those words. We raised our children, loved each other fiercely, and led our lives with honor. As for Claire, well, in case you're wondering, she didn't live long after the truth came to light. About a year later, someone sent her videos of her lovers speaking about her. In those videos, they revealed what they really thought of her, treating her like nothing more than an object. They laughed about how they'd manipulated her into having children and how they had exploited her and those kids for years. The footage was posted online, and copies were sent to her neighbors. Claire took her own life soon after. When she was found, she was clutching an old photograph of herself, me, and the kids at an amusement park. Everyone in the picture was smiling, laughing, looking like the perfect family. No one knows where she got that picture or why she had held on to it. It was a quiet, haunting memory buried with her. Only 2 people attended the graveside service, 2 figures, listed in the guest book as Gray Stallion and Iron Claw. A few weeks later, several of those old videos resurfaced online, showing the group's depraved actions. The footage became public, leading to severe consequences for everyone involved. They had been filming themselves for years, documenting their secret lives. Every video ended the same way, with the men mocking Claire, calling her their stupid strumpet, followed by an image of her body and the official autopsy report that confirmed her suicide by poison. The group quickly disbanded after that. They were shunned by their community, with many of them moving away, becoming recluses. But somehow, the videos seemed to follow them, no matter where they went. No one knows who kept posting them or who sent them to the neighbors in their new towns. But the group's pursuit of selfish pleasure had destroyed countless lives.